Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Connections Over Compliance, Rewiring Our Perceptions of Discipline by Lori L. Desautels, Ph.D. Foreword by Michael McKnight. Narrated by Jennifer Aquino. Foreword by Michael McKnight. Children are the most honest barometers of the health of our communities. Their disruptive behavior is a call to action to all of us, to tend to the broken links in suffering with compassion and wisdom. Trauma-informed positive behavior support website. As I sit to write this opening of Connections Over Compliance, Rewiring Our Perceptions of Discipline, at the beginning of May 2020, our schools in America remain closed due to the coronavirus pandemic. The United Nations state that this pandemic is the most challenging crisis the world has faced since World War II. Over 65,000 people in the United States have died, and there is no clear end in sight. Within the general public, including those who never acquire the virus, the overall lifestyle change and the fear that we are managing on a daily basis will lead to a massive collective trauma response. We are all experiencing a global trauma, and researchers are warning that the coronavirus pandemic could inflict long-lasting emotional trauma on an unprecedented global scale. There is no question that when our schools reopen, we will see an enormous increase in children and youth who are carrying toxic levels of stress into our school. This new book becomes even more important at this time. Dr. Lori Desautels and I first met in 2012. We believe it was on Facebook or LinkedIn. What immediately drew my attention was the photograph on the cover of her first book, How May I Serve You? Revelations in Education, published that same year. The photo is of an adolescent young woman with words inscribed on her troubled face: loser, nobody, failure, desperate, that vividly describe her inner state. That photo impacted me emotionally before I ever talked to Lori, now my very good friend and colleague. Albert Bandura, professor emeritus at Stanford University, says that fortuitous events have more to do with what happens in our lives than with formal plans or normal processes. And stumbling into Dr. Lori's first book was one of those major events in my life. Anyone who knows Lori knows how fast she moves. Shortly after contacting her, I was invited to speak at Marian University, where she was teaching at that time. We have been great friends and collaborators ever since, writing 2 books together and often co-teaching as we share what we learn with other educators. The overarching theme in Lori's first 3 books speaks to creating deep connections with all students and creating touch points in the lives of the students we teach. Lori is passionate about changing the way schools view children and their behavior. In How May I Serve You? She speaks about creating a compassionate presence. In Unwritten, the story of a living system, a pathway to enlivening and transforming education, you will hear Lori speak about how deep learning is profoundly relational, as she frames it as an essential part of schools that are living systems, rather than machines. And in Eyes Are Never Quiet, listening beneath the behaviors of our most troubled students, her voice speaks to the integration of neuroscience, psychology, and pedagogy into our efforts towards supporting our most challenging children and youth. It has been a pleasure watching the evolving nature of her passion to change the way we educate our young. For me, there is no more important work. With her 4th book, Connections Over Compliance, Rewiring Our Perception of Discipline, Lori now takes a deep dive into the essence of school and classroom culture, school discipline systems. These systems, working best for students who need them the least and working poorly for students who we think need them the most, are at the heart of how schools treat our young. We take many of the current school discipline practices as something that schools have always done, and we rarely get to see a clear vision of what these practices do and what they could become. A school cannot call itself trauma responsive without an overhaul of this behavior management system. In this new book, Lori literally rewires our perception of school discipline. Through her use of the term relational discipline, she shifts the entire way that most people think about discipline, moving the focus away from student punishment and toward the expectations and, indeed, the brain states of the adults tasked with teaching them. Lori aligns her model of relational discipline with applied educational neuroscience that gives educators the tools needed to begin this shift. She firmly situates this new view of discipline in our current understanding of neuroanatomy and neuroscience. Discipline shifts away from consequences and punishments and toward our ability to regulate our students, beginning with regulating ourselves. This book will give educators, parents, guardians, and any other adult tasked with looking after our young a foundation for understanding that students showing disrespect, defiance, disobedience, disinterest, and depression may actually be struggling with regulation. By aligning relational discipline with what we know about neurobiology, Lori offers a wealth of resources for concrete brain-aligned discipline strategies. You'll be able to learn and immediately deploy many of these easy-to-use classroom and school strategies. You'll also learn how to teach children and youth about their own neuroanatomy to help them gain a deep understanding about their emotions and behaviors, leading them toward the valuable life skill of self-regulation. Beneath all the brain-aligned strategies and ideas you'll encounter in Connections Over Compliance, you'll discover the foundation that has been at the heart of every book Lori has written: connections. Lori calls them touch points. Everything in this book rests on the foundational skill of adults creating connections with the students they serve. These brain-aligned strategies ask us to focus on our own internal states, allowing us to intentionally build connections, even with our most troubled students. A favorite Nelson Mandela quote resonates with both of us. Let us build communities in which our children and youth, especially our most troubled, can belong. As our schools reopen after the coronavirus pandemic, and as our students come back to us struggling with regulation issues, possibly in greater numbers than we've ever seen, this book offers us the tools we so desperately need to begin to actualize this vision of connections over compliance in our schools, classrooms, and communities. Author's Preface Number 1. A pandemic crisis calls for a re-envisioning and an opportunity in our educational systems. We are not here to see through one another, but to see one another through. Anne Lamott. I am completing this book during our global COVID-19 pandemic. It has been a challenging, heartbreaking, thought-filled, and soul-searching endeavor as I watch from both the outside and inside. What am I observing? A living collective organism, our world, trying to discover and grasp ways to make sense and meaning through the vast unknown of this disease, and the time that its spread has both taken from us and given to us. And yet, life has always been plagued with the unknown. We have always managed to work through challenging and extraordinary historical periods as traditional ways of living start to break apart, and the emergent new is met with resistance, grief, confusion, innovation, and sometimes resolve. As I write these words, the United States has more confirmed cases of and deaths from this current virus than any other nation. The traumatic conditions of isolation, chronic unpredictability, and physical/emotional restraint are affecting all of us at some level. And although this is a learning experience that nobody wants, perhaps we can now understand how these conditions of trauma are what so many families, children, and communities live with daily. The existing adversities of poverty, racism, mental illness, criminalized addiction, healthcare inadequacies, and marginalized living conditions all contribute to extreme levels of depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges for youth who must cope with them every day. These societal adversities correlate highly to adverse childhood experiences, and we now face an additional layer of pandemic trauma on top of all this existing trauma and adversity. COVID-19 is producing a growing viral fear throughout the world, and our youth and children feel it all. CNN reported that 9 of the 20 largest metropolitan police departments reported double-digit percentage jumps in domestic violence 911 calls or cases in March 2020, compared to last year or the months of January or February 2020. Domestic violence is rooted in power and control, and all of us are feeling a loss of power and control right now. Katie Ray Jones, the CEO of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, told CNN, "I share these statistics because many of our children and youth are being impacted by the fears, violence, and loss of a felt safe place of connection when schools abruptly closed in March of 2020. Our students and educators across the country and the world walked out of school on a Friday afternoon, and many will not return for several months, with possible additional extensions. We did not have the closure we normally expect at the end of a school year. Many students lost their safe place and their meals. They didn't get to say goodbye. They missed that needed, predictable, safe closure with the adults whom they trust and who are their lifelines through challenging times. How do children and youth express their feelings of abandonment, loss, grief, and confusion? How do adults express these same feelings? Often, our behaviors tell our stories, signaling the pain we can barely speak of or understand. Our behaviors are always communicating our needs, our feelings, and quite possibly our fears that feel too big to contain. And how does the world receive and tolerate these expressions? In this book, we will explore what is beneath the behaviors we observe as we attune and address those embodied implicit emotions and sensations, creating the words, actions, and scenarios that often feel so disrespectful and disruptive. Through our postures, gestures, and facial expressions, our bodies can shed light on the behavioral landscape that feels so unreachable. Our bodies are our greatest teachers. Psychiatrist and author Dr. Ian McGilchrist shares that when there is a serious jolt to the world community and landscape, much like a global pandemic, a crisis develops alongside a turning point. He refers to this type of event as a meaning crisis. A meaning crisis communicates a common cause and a call to bring out the best in one another, giving us an opportunity to belong, to shift our perspectives, and to reframe these benign developments. I am addressing this conceptual shift in the introduction of this book because our perceptions, thought processes, and current actions with regard to school and home discipline protocols have left many learning and home environments stalled in the outdated mindsets of punishment, harsh consequences, and behaviorism, and often completely out of touch with current research. We continue to act and react upon past belief systems with discussions, guidelines, and policies that exclude the sciences of attachment, adverse childhood experiences, and the effects on developing brain architecture. In this time, we have been plunged into a state of global uncertainty. And as we try to comprehend our best responses on the scale of human interaction with these uncertainties, starved for anything that feels familiar, safe, and non-threatening, we may find ourselves subconsciously forcing outcomes. Sadly, this response is all too familiar. We have often unintentionally, through educational preparation, professional developments, extensive teacher trainings, and histories of unexamined, patterned, and repetitive ways of being and doing, created experiences of recycled discipline and behavioral policies that resemble an outdated rulebook for order and obedience. We have grasped fixes while forgetting that human behaviors are always communicating a desire to connect, feel better, and recalibrate toward equilibrium. In writing this book at this time, I believe we are presented with a hermeneutic circle challenge. Hermeneutics is defined by the understanding and interpretation of an experience through contextual dependency. For example, if you begin to see the world as a machine, everything in your interpretation of this view becomes machine-like, and the elements of a machine become a model of your personal understanding based on your angle of vision. Our visions hold our belief systems, private logic, and cultural values. If you see the world as a fluid, interpersonal, dynamic entity, then your experiences and angle of vision begin to show you many events, relationships, and conditions through this relational context. Whenever any of us pursue knowledge, it is context dependent, leading us to take the unfamiliar and subconsciously infuse what we know and believe as we weave it into a new model. How do our current discipline protocols mirror our hermeneutic circles? How do our belief systems, cultural heritage, and generational tales affect our vision and biases regarding traditional discipline protocols? It feels as if we have repackaged similar behavioral management models, systems, and practices with new labels and fancy terms. Traditional discipline programs and practices have often embraced the concepts of right, wrong, logic, consequence, reward, punishment, exclusion, pain, discomfort, disobedience, non-compliance, and correction, all with a singular focus on student behavior. We now are called to explore and redefine discipline protocols from a place of crisis and opportunity with the initial perceptual shift on adult behaviors. That is to say, the behavior of the adults interacting with the students. Our world systems do not operate separately, and this is also true for the systems within our learning environments. The school-to-prison pipeline is an example of how improperly blended systems can and have distorted, stifled, and compromised human growth and development, while intimately impacting a pathological evolution that affects the well-being of children, adolescents, adults, and eventually communities as a whole. We see this now. We are living this pathology now. But the human organism is built for resiliency. We are created to bend, wobble, heal, and repair. And this calls for an emphasis on relational discipline frameworks through a brain-aligned lens. When we begin to deeply understand that all experiences build brain architecture, we will uphold our ordinary experiences as sacred and tangible teaching moments that support and prioritize safety and connection throughout our children's lives. Our nervous systems are constantly asking, who can I trust and are you with me? Trauma therapist Bonnie Badenoch shares that a felt sense of safety is at the core of healing trauma and compensating for adversities, and it is in this safe, warm, stable, responsive space between educator and student, or parent and child, where the aching desire to feel heard, seen, and felt is at the heart of embodied relational discipline practices. When we hold this silent receptive space for another person, we enable repair and healing. All children and youth experience several small potential traumas during each day, and, as Bonnie Badenoch describes, these shards of these accumulating experiences that linger in our muscles, belly, hearts, brains, and body systems gradually shape our perceptual systems and how the world looks. Referring to these events as small traumas is not intended to diminish or disrespect the horrific experiences so many youth carry into our schools. This research helps us to understand that when we hold the sacred space of co-regulation for our children and youth, we are helping them, through the safety of our own regulated nervous system, to digest and integrate the dysregulating experiences they have amassed. Our brains are complex historical organs, and they have the inherent capacity to self-organize and self-regulate. But in many cases, it requires a relational experience to fully realize this state. Each moment with a child is a potentially therapeutic moment. As Dr. Stephen Porges states so beautifully, we wear our hearts on our faces and in our voices, as our nervous systems influence our body's moment-to-moment expression, automatically offering a sense of safety or danger on one another. Our current understanding of relational interpersonal neurobiology brings us to a crossroads where this body of knowledge is at the core of how we can re-envision discipline practices and protocols in our schools. Recent research emphasizes that true discipline for our students begins with an adult brain that feels safe, calm, and still. The behaviors to which we should give the most attention are the behaviors that we want to sprout and flourish. This intentional attention begins with adults who are willing to dive into their uncontested and possibly unexplored perspectives and belief systems, individual, familial, communal, and generational. These are the perspectives and belief systems that we have unintentionally carried into this moment, and that we should examine with the intention of doing what is best for our students. May you find personal and professional grace within this book, written to acknowledge and share the new focus on adult well-being as the cornerstone to this discipline shift that we hope to see in the educational arena, in our homes, and in our communities. This is the discipline shift that will inform our future brain-aligned and relational discipline policies. May you find connection to your inner source of well-being, and may you share the contagion of this discovery with every student and colleague that you encounter. It is said that the greatest gift we can give our children and youth rests with the care we give ourselves. In the compelling words of Dr. Bruce D. Perry, the most traumatic aspects of all disasters involve the shattering of human connections, and this is especially true for children. Being harmed by the people who are supposed to love you, being abandoned by them, being robbed by the one-on-one relationships that allow you to feel safe and valued, and to become humane. These are profoundly destructive experiences because humans are inescapably social beings. The worst catastrophes that can befall us inevitably involve relational loss. As a result, recovery from trauma and neglect is also all about relationships, rebuilding trust, regaining confidence, returning to a sense of security, and reconnecting to love. Of course, medications can help relieve symptoms, and talking to a therapist can be incredibly useful. But healing and recovery are impossible, even with the best medications and therapy in the world, without lasting, caring connections to others. As this book was being sent to press, more devastating events have occurred across this nation, and its pain is felt throughout the world. All 50 states and 18 countries have joined together to fight racism across this nation and the world. The 2020/2021 school year will be filled with many unknowns, heightened emotions, and a variety of behaviors masked with heartfelt sadness. Difficult discussions, reflections, and opportunities will be shared across our communities, and our children and youth will be significantly impacted by these events, unrest, and the suffering that has taken place over the past several months. Our emotional and social school cultures and climates will matter much more than the content and academics being taught. We will need to address the COVID-19 pandemic, the chronic unpredictability, isolation, and the physical and emotional restraint that so many communities, families, and youth have experienced. Additionally, the viral effects and contagion of the blatant racism that has compromised the lives of so many of our Black and Brown families, students, and communities requires our sustained attention, deepened learning, and our active engagement and action. Racism is embedded in the fabric of our country, as well as our educational systems. Black students are 4 times more likely to be suspended from school, with a significant correlation of poorer health outcomes. Black students are 3 times more likely to be referred to police for something happening on the school grounds, and 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for school-related incidents. Data from 32 million students in 96,000 K-12 schools across the United States found the discipline gap between Black and white students was much larger in counties with more racial bias. The study was taken from 1.6 million respondents from the National Academy of Sciences. These are not brand new statistics, but our collective awareness has been magnified by the ongoing and recent national corruptive injustices to our Black communities. Systems of oppression can be disrupted in our schools as educational environments can become the fertile, emergent, and sacred places of felt safety, co-regulation, and inclusive practices of the teaching and learning processes that are founded on social justice, equity, and systemic tolerance that have been missing for over 400 years. This occurs when discipline practices are seen as preventive, relational, and brain-aligned. Our discipline protocols must be in place inside our procedures, routines, morning meetings, and rituals with open discussions and reflections of current events, feelings, and sensations as we bring our lived experiences into our classrooms and schools. This is the adult shift that we must lead for our disciplinary practices to be equitable, non-biased, and steeped in social justice for all students. These protocols are not scripted social and emotional curriculums or afterthoughts. Rather, they are living practices that are embedded in every moment of our school day. All brains learn deeply and experience well-being when we feel safe and connected to one another, and these conditions must be created and prioritized in our classrooms and schools for the critical discussions of social justice and equity to occur. Considering the recent COVID virus and racial traumas alongside the tenuous national brokenness, we are going to be challenged with escalating emotions and therefore survival behaviors from our students and staff who carry in significant amounts of hopelessness. Layered traumas can create chaos, pain, and much dysregulation, and these traumatic conditions will be challenging. As educators, we will be called to first and foremost create a safe, stable, and emotionally available space for our children and youth with an adult who has taken the time to calm his or her own nervous system. Emotions are contagious, and brain-aligned relational discipline will need to begin with the adults. The way in which we are each attended to shapes the relational moment and possibilities. In other words, when we shift the focus of our attention, those within our focus will intimately sense the change. When we attend to a disorder, a disability, a disturbance, our students intuit this negative focus. It calls forth that disorder, disturbance, that fragile and developing identity that subconsciously whispers, "Something is wrong with me." Being perceived as having a disorder, a behavioral challenge, or being a liar, a troublemaker, an addict, an alcoholic, or a variance of any kind indirectly states that there is something wrong that needs to be fixed. This creates further separation in the possibility of relationships and feels disrespectful. There is a felt sense of judgment and disconnection. Kids and adults in stress already believe they are damaged goods. When we label, judge, and assess based upon our own thoughts, perceptions, and stories, we unintentionally disrupt and rob the fragile ground of safety. Author's Preface Number 2. Our brain's development and the impact of implicit bias and racial disparities and discipline gaps in our schools. Try again, but fail better. Samuel Beckett. Human brains begin developing in utero from the brainstem to the cortex, back to front, and from the inside out. Brains are social, historical, and experience-dependent organs, and survival is the priority of the brain. Since the time of our evolution, the major predators of humans are humans, and we witnessed this on television and social media for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on May 25, 2020. Hate, power, aggression, and violence are steeped in fear. Fear wears many masks, establishing in and out groups, control over, power over, isolation, rejection, humiliation, taking, killing, and attacking people and their lives. Racism is a social disease. Brains are also built for resiliency, as are our communities and world systems, but differences scare people. The truth is that diversity in living systems creates stronger systems if that diversity is recognized, celebrated, and deeply integrated into our cultures and communities for personal and collective growth and resiliency. Diversity promotes creativity and innovation. Systemically, in this time, we are still embracing diversity and differences as a personal and collective predatory threat to overcome.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?